Pull over to the side, now." The sharp voice of a young female officer pierced through the late afternoon bustle like a siren no one wanted to hear. The command, shrill and abrupt, rang out above the steady hum of traffic and hurried footsteps in downtown San Mateo. It was a Wednesday, just past 5:30 p.m., and the city's tech professionals and university students were spilling into the streets, eager to escape another day of deadlines and meetings. In the middle of this weekday rush, a black Tesla Model S Plaid glided along the lane with practiced ease, its glossy matte finish catching the golden slant of California sunlight. Behind the wheel sat Jonathan Pierce, composed, quiet, his eyes behind designer lenses focused ahead. He wasn't rushing. In fact, for the first time in weeks, he'd cleared his calendar after speaking at a Stanford policy roundtable on AI ethics. The event had gone well, and he had politely declined the driver his team usually assigned. Today, he wanted the road to himself, a rare moment of peace for someone whose life was usually a stream of secure emails, high-level memos, and tense conversations behind closed doors in Washington. Wearing a soft navy sport coat over a crisp white shirt, no tie, and a simple Richard Mille on his wrist, gifted to him after his presentation at the Munich security conference, Jonathan looked nothing like the man the two officers apparently assumed him to be. His license plates were from D.C., nothing unusual, given that he worked part-time as a federal advisor. But that detail, combined with his skin color and luxury vehicle, seemed to trigger suspicion. He had just come to a smooth stop at the intersection of 4th and B Street when he heard the whoop of a siren. Glancing into the rearview mirror, he saw flashing lights from a black and white Ford Explorer weaving its way behind him. No one else was being stopped, just him. He blinked once, calmly, and turned his signal on. Then, without drama, he steered into a legal parking spot in front of a corner cafe. As he powered down the vehicle and rolled his window halfway, he noticed the first few heads beginning to turn. Some pedestrians slowed. A woman with shopping bags took out her phone. Jonathan sighed inwardly. He had violated no traffic laws, wasn't speeding, hadn't touched his phone. The vehicle was registered, insured, and spotless. Still, he waited in silence, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel. He had no idea yet how far this moment would spiral, or that it would draw not just cameras, but corridors of power into its wake. The two officers stepped out of the patrol SUV with a kind of purposeful urgency that felt more like theater than protocol. Jonathan observed them from his seat, unmoving. The younger one, Officer Jenny Klein, looked barely 30, her blonde ponytail pulled high and tight under her cap, face sharp with a mixture of focus and unease. She approached first, walking with quick, clipped steps, her right hand already resting near her sidearm, a gesture not lost on Jonathan. Behind her came the older man, Sergeant Roy Halpern, stockier, slower, with the weathered face of someone who'd long since stopped enjoying the job, but couldn't give it up. His gut strained slightly against his duty belt, and his expression radiated impatience, like the very act of having to be here was beneath him. Officer Klein reached the window and peered in, as if unsure what she was seeing. "License and registration," she said flatly, offering no greeting, no explanation. Jonathan looked up at her, his voice even. "Good evening, officer. Can I ask what I'm being stopped for?" She hesitated, lips tightening. Before she could answer, Halpern arrived at her side and leaned in, voice gruff. "Your vehicle matches a description," he said, "and it's got out-of-state plates. Could be stolen. Could be connected to something." Jonathan frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in measured irritation. "Stolen? Officer, this is a Tesla Plaid, registered to me, fully insured, and I've committed no violation. The plates are DC because I work in federal policy." Halpern didn't flinch. "Lots of folks say that. Doesn't mean we take their word for it. Gotta check things out." He gave the car a once-over like a suspicious mechanic, then added under his breath, "Don't exactly look like the usual folks driving one of these around here." It wasn't loud, but it wasn't subtle either. Jonathan held back the first retort that sprang to mind. He wasn't surprised, just tired. These were the kinds of moments that still came for him, no matter how far he'd climbed, no matter the titles, no matter the rooms he walked in. "I'll hand over my documents," he said quietly, reaching into his inner coat pocket, moving slowly and deliberately, keeping his hands visible. He retrieved a sleek card holder and slid out both his registration and a federally issued ID card. He handed them out the window without another word. Officer Klein took them quickly, almost snatching, then turned and passed them to Halpern. As she did, her eyes lingered on Jonathan with something between challenge and doubt. Halpern examined the documents briefly, lips pressed thin. He didn't comment, just gave a short grunt. "These look clean," he said, but his tone made it sound like a problem rather than a resolution. "Still, we'll need to verify a few things." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Just stay put," Halpern barked, already beginning to circle the vehicle. "We've got reason to believe there could be controlled substances or weapons inside." That was new and absurd. Jonathan's jaw tensed, but he kept his tone level. "You do realize that's a very serious accusation to make without any probable cause." Klein's hand had drifted even closer to her holster now, her posture stiffening. "We can escalate this," she said, eyes narrowing. "You either cooperate or we'll consider this interference and resistance. That gives us full authority to remove you by force if needed." Jonathan looked from one to the other, letting silence fill the space between them. He could see a few more phones raised in the crowd now. The glare of a store sign reflected in his windshield. There was a part of him, a younger, angrier part, that wanted to call out the insult in every word, every assumption. But something colder, sharper, took over. He knew this game. He'd been playing it in boardrooms, behind podiums, and now apparently on sidewalks. The difference this time? He wasn't the same boy they thought they'd cornered. Not even close. Jonathan's hands remained still on the steering wheel, but his mind had already slipped somewhere else, back to a sidewalk in Montgomery, Alabama, almost 30 years earlier. He was 15, lanky, too tall for his own clothes, standing frozen next to his father's old Buick, parked outside Greater Mercy Church. His father, Harold Pierce, had been wearing his Sunday best, dark slacks, white shirt, navy tie with small gold crosses on it, still neatly pressed from the service an hour earlier. They had just finished handing out leftover boxed meals to a few neighbors who hadn't been able to attend. It was the kind of small act of kindness Harold always insisted on. Quiet, consistent. A man who believed deeply in dignity, in service, in being a good example, especially to his only son. That day, 2 police cruisers rolled up fast, tires skimming gravel, and before Harold could even say hello or reach for his ID, he was shoved against the hood of the Buick, his palms splayed, cheek pressed hard against the warm metal. Fit the description, they had said. A black male in a tie loitering near parked cars. Jonathan could still remember the crackle of the police radio, the way one of the officers tightened the cuffs on his father's wrists, even as Harold quietly explained he was a middle school math teacher, a deacon, and had been volunteering all morning. It didn't matter. None of it did. What burned into Jonathan's memory wasn't just the injustice. It was the silence. The small crowd that had gathered didn't yell. They just watched. And Jonathan had watched too. Standing there with a boxed meal still in his hands, his heart pounding so loud he thought it might knock him over. His father didn't raise his voice, didn't resist. He looked at his son once, just once, and the message in his eyes was clear. Don't move, don't speak, don't give them anything. They let Harold go 20 minutes later. No apology. Just a huff, a shrug, and a warning to watch where you park. Harold never mentioned it again. But Jonathan had never forgotten. That single moment on that cracked sidewalk had shaped the way he carried himself through the world. The way he dressed, the way he spoke, the way he prepared for everything. He built a life on precision and control, not just to succeed, but to ensure that no one would ever be able to touch him like that again. Not legally, not emotionally, not physically. And yet here he was, decades and lifetimes away from that boy, sitting in a vehicle worth more than most people's homes, with federal credentials in his glove box, and still, none of it mattered. Not to Officer Klein, not to Sergeant Halpern. The years, the work, the restraint, they were invisible to people who only saw skin before status. Jonathan blinked once, steadying himself, returning to the present. The memory didn't make him weak. It made him sharper. He would not forget that look in his father's eyes. Not now. Not when the same thing was about to happen to him, just on a bigger street with brighter cameras. As Jonathan sat there, watching Sergeant Halpern pace around the Tesla like a hawk circling prey. A sharper weight settled behind his eyes, one heavier than the indignity of being profiled. Because inside the leather document sleeve tucked safely in the passenger footwell sat a sealed white envelope stamped with a discreet federal classification stripe and embossed with a seal most civilians wouldn't recognize. It wasn't just a folder, it was a live wire. The contents inside were early advisory notes and confidential memoranda relating to artificial intelligence ethics and defense policy, drafted in preparation for the upcoming closed-door summit between the Office of Science and Technology Policy and key partners at the Department of Defense. Jonathan had been asked personally, through quiet back-channel discussions, to review and annotate the documents before Friday. He hadn't trusted couriers. He'd taken it himself, hand to hand. That document didn't belong in a police report, didn't belong in an evidence locker, and certainly didn't belong being flipped open on the hood of a patrol car by two undertrained officers who didn't even understand what they were doing. If they ordered him out and searched the vehicle without a warrant or cause, they wouldn't just be violating his rights, they'd be breaching a chain of custody that extended all the way to federal clearance protocols. It would ignite a process neither of them was prepared to handle. Not them, not their precinct, and not the city of San Mateo. Jonathan didn't scare easily, but he understood consequences, and he knew just how fast a mistake like that could ripple. All it would take was one careless hand reaching into the wrong folder, one photo snapped and leaked, and the story wouldn't just be about an overstep on the sidewalk. It would become a headline: Federal advisor's documents exposed in botched traffic stop. He could already see the implications. Calls from DC, investigations into breach of protocol, questions about why he was transporting sensitive material at all, even if he'd done nothing wrong. It would all lead back to this moment, this absurd encounter born of ignorance and arrogance. Halpern had moved to the rear now, eyeing the trunk like he might demand it opened. Klein stood closer, her stance more rigid, more uncertain now, as if she was starting to register that the man in the driver's seat wasn't what she'd assumed. But it didn't matter. They'd crossed a threshold, and neither looked ready to back off. Jonathan could feel the thin line stretching. He knew it well, knew how quickly it could snap. He also knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the systems he worked to reform, the national security he helped advise on, and the very real danger of mixing unchecked power with unqualified judgment. He exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. If they took one more step in the wrong direction, they weren't just going to find themselves in the wrong legally. They were going to find themselves in direct violation of the kind of protocols that did not forgive. Jonathan didn't move suddenly. He didn't raise his voice or slam a hand against the dash. Instead, with the same calm that had carried him through Senate briefings, trade negotiations, and private White House sessions, he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and retrieved a matte, black phone. Unbranded, unadorned, a device that didn't ring unless it had to. It wasn't the one synced to his email or calendar. It wasn't tracked by any commercial provider. It had one purpose, and today it was about to serve it. He unlocked the screen with a fingerprint swipe and pressed a single preloaded number. No contacts, no interface, just a connection hardwired into protocol. The line picked up before the first ring could even complete. "Pierce," came the voice. Deep, steady, and unmistakably alert. Jonathan recognized it instantly. Chief Nate Holloway, San Mateo Police Department, head of internal operations, and more importantly, a man Jonathan had shared a dorm hallway with their sophomore year at Howard, long before badges and bureaucracies stood between them. "Nate," Jonathan said smoothly, his tone still even but unmistakably edged. "I'm at the corner of 4th and B. Two of your officers, Klein and Halpern, have decided I fit someone's idea of suspicious, despite producing federal ID and fully valid registration. They're about 10 seconds away from either searching my vehicle or arresting me without cause." The silence on the other end was brief, but heavy. Then Holloway's voice came back, quieter now. "You serious?" "As a heart attack," Jonathan replied. "And Nate, I'm not calling you for favors, but you and I both know what's in the car. If they open that envelope, we've got a breach, a real one. And I'd rather not explain to Washington how your patrol team stumbled into a national security violation because someone didn't like a black man in a Tesla. A breath, then another. Jonathan could hear Holloway's chair creak. "I'm on my way," he said. "Nobody moves till I get there. Don't escalate, just stay put." Jonathan hung up without saying goodbye. He didn't need to. He placed the phone back in his coat pocket and turned his eyes forward, settling into stillness again. Through the windshield, he could see Klein watching him now, trying to read his body language, maybe sensing that something had shifted. Halpern was still behind the car, hands on his hips, posture puffed. But the air had changed. There was a pressure coming that neither of them could see yet. Jonathan didn't blink. He had done his part. The call had been made, the fuse had been lit, and now all that remained was to wait for power to arrive. Not through volume, not through confrontation, but through precision, timing, and the weight of being exactly who they didn't realize they were messing with. It didn't take long, less than 4 minutes, maybe 3. But it felt longer, like time itself had stretched across the pavement, caught between the rising tension in the air and the weight of unspoken assumptions crashing down in real time. A low hum cut through the atmosphere first. 3 unmarked black SUVs moving in formation down B Street, turning the corner with synchronized precision. Their lights weren't flashing at first, just subtle pulses in the grillwork, but the silence they carried was louder than any siren. Then, as they neared the cafe, the strobes ignited, red and blue flashes tearing across the glass storefronts, painting the sidewalk in color. The crowd that had gathered outside the corner boutique and coffee shop now stood stock still. Several people already had their phones up. A woman with 2 kids stepped back instinctively, clutching them close. Even Officer Klein turned at the sound, her shoulders twitching as the lead vehicle braked hard and came to a full stop just behind their patrol unit. Doors opened in a near-simultaneous rhythm. 4 officers in dark tactical suits, no visible badges, no chatter, stepped out, each one scanning the scene without blinking. But it was the figure who emerged from the second SUV, moving faster than the others, who changed the temperature of the moment entirely. Chief Nate Holloway. Tall, trim, silver at his temples, still carrying himself with the cadence of someone who once walked a beat, but had long since traded in his street instincts for command. He didn't glance at Klein. He didn't look at Halpern. He walked straight toward Jonathan's car with the kind of urgency that made people part before him. His suit coat was unbuttoned, his ID already in his hand, and his expression sat somewhere between fury and disappointment. Jonathan didn't move, he just opened the door slowly and stepped out, adjusting his jacket as he stood. "Nate," he said quietly. "Pierce," Holloway nodded back, but his voice was clipped, sharp. Then he turned. "Klein, Halpern, step back from the vehicle immediately." Klein's mouth opened like she wanted to explain something, but nothing came out. Halpern, slower to understand what was unfolding, squinted at Holloway like he wasn't sure if this was real. "Sir, I was just—" "Don't," Holloway cut him off. "Not one more word. Do you even know who you've been detaining?" Silence. Jonathan didn't need to say a thing. His presence said it all. Holloway turned toward one of the plainclothes officers and gestured with 2 fingers. "Disarm them. Right now. Badges, weapons, radios. I want them off the line and in internal affairs within the hour. And someone better start pulling the body cam footage before it mysteriously disappears." The 2 plainclothes officers stepped forward, professional but unmerciful. Halpern looked stunned. Klein looked like she'd been dropped into cold water. Their utility belts were removed without ceremony, their sidearms taken, radios pulled. The crowd watched in a silence so thick it hurt. A few phones captured every moment. This wasn't discipline, it was exposure. And Jonathan stood there, composed, silent, watching it unfold without satisfaction, without vengeance. Just that same calm gaze that had never left his face. Holloway turned to him finally, his voice lower now. "I'm sorry, Pierce. I'm really sorry. This shouldn't have happened." Jonathan said nothing yet. He was still watching Klein. Still watching Halpern. Watching what they looked like when they finally realized that they'd walked into something far, far bigger than their assumptions. When the chaos settled, the gear stripped from their waists, and the murmurs of the crowd gave way to a heavy silence. Holloway motioned for the remaining officers to give him space. He turned toward Jonathan, eyes full of a weight that went beyond duty. "This wasn't just procedural failure," he said quietly, voice almost drowned by the city's ambient hum. "This was personal. This was blindness." Jonathan didn't answer right away. He looked past Holloway, toward the storefront windows now plastered with faces, curious, confused, some furious. His hand stayed at his sides, relaxed but purposeful. Then he looked Holloway in the eye. "You know, I've lived long enough to stop being surprised," he said evenly, "but I haven't lived long enough to stop being tired." Holloway exhaled, jaw tense. "I don't expect forgiveness, Jonathan. I just need you to know that this won't be swept away." Jonathan gave a small nod, but it was the kind that carried weight, not agreement. "This isn't about me," he said. "This isn't just two officers making bad decisions. It's what trained them to think like that, what rewarded it, what ignored it. That's what needs fixing." Holloway blinked, the truth of it cutting deeper than the rebuke. "I hear you." "Do you?" Jonathan asked, "Because I've heard that phrase before, Nate, but you know what I rarely see? Follow-through. Not memos, not briefings. Action, actual consequence, and training that doesn't just check boxes." He didn't raise his voice, but it sliced through the air. "I've advised 3 administrations on risk and liability. I've written protocols for machines to know when a target is innocent. Maybe it's time we ask more of our people." Holloway looked down, swallowing the weight of those words. Then he raised his gaze. "You'll get that follow-through, starting tonight." There was sincerity in his tone, but also pressure, the quiet understanding that this could go viral, national, irreversible. Jonathan turned slightly, glancing back at his car, the crowd, the shattered illusion that status could insulate anyone. "I didn't want this moment," he said, "but maybe someone else needed to see it. Because this, what just happened, it's exactly why so many people stop trusting the system. They don't stop caring, they stop believing it will ever care about them." Holloway stood still, nodding slowly, knowing there wasn't much else to say. Some truths didn't need echo, they just needed to land. And this one had. The consequences came quickly. And for once, they didn't just stop at written warnings or quiet transfers. Within 24 hours, Officers Klein and Halpern were officially terminated from the San Mateo Police Department for gross misconduct, abuse of authority, and violation of federal civil rights protections. An internal investigation, supervised directly by Holloway, confirmed not only procedural failures, but an alarming pattern in Halpern's history of stops targeting Black and Latino men driving high-end vehicles. The department released a rare public statement acknowledging systemic shortcomings and pledging full cooperation with external oversight. Civil rights organizations, already monitoring use of force patterns across several California departments, seized on the incident as a clear case study of racial bias in discretionary policing. The footage captured by bystanders and retrieved from patrol vehicle dashcams went viral in less than a day. National media picked it up. The words, "Pierce, Tesla, and San Mateo" trended on social platforms for hours. But behind the headlines, real policy gears began to turn. At the next city council meeting, Holloway, under pressure from both elected officials and public outcry, proposed a full audit of the department's stop-and-search practices and a restructuring of training modules on implicit bias and constitutional boundaries. Independent civilian oversight was reinstated after years of dormancy. Every officer was required to complete a new certification process in Fourth Amendment compliance, reviewed by a third-party law firm with federal oversight experience. More than reforms, there was a tone shift, a quiet ripple. Officers around the department started asking questions they hadn't asked before, not just about how they performed their duties, but how they saw the people they served. And though it didn't erase what had happened, it shifted something. It created space for reflection where there had once been only routine. For Jonathan, none of it changed the fact that he'd been profiled. None of it undid the humiliation, the calculated calm he'd been forced to summon. But it meant something that the system, for once, didn't look away. That this time, silence didn't get the final word. In a press interview weeks later, Holloway summarized it plainly. "We failed. But we listened, and we acted. That's not enough, but it's where change begins." 2 weeks later, Jonathan stood again in front of the same storefront, this time without a crowd, without patrol cars or flashing lights. The shattered tension from that night had settled into a quiet resolve. He wore the same navy coat, though this time zipped high against the brisk morning chill. In his hand was a sealed envelope addressed to the San Mateo Civilian Oversight Board. Inside, a personal memorandum outlining a federal pilot initiative to audit stop-and-search data across departments with recurring bias complaints. It was clear, technical, and firm. He wasn't just closing a chapter, he was setting a foundation for the next. Before walking in, he paused and glanced at the reflection in the glass door. For a moment, he didn't see the policy expert or the special counsel. He saw the 17-year-old version of himself again. Standing on the side of that rural Alabama road, hands raised, heart racing, wondering if the officer approaching him saw a threat or a child. That boy had grown into a man who now had the tools and the power to reshape the rules. And as he stepped through the door, he carried with him not just authority, but a promise. That dignity would no longer be negotiable. As Jonathan walked back to his car, a young boy on a bicycle slowed near the curb and stared at him with wide eyes. "Hey, mister," the boy called out. "Were you the guy from the video?" Jonathan smiled gently. "Yeah," he replied, "but more importantly, I'm someone trying to make sure that never happens to you." The boy nodded, thoughtful, then pedaled away. And in that quiet exchange, no podium, no speech, was the heartbeat of real change. Not in sweeping declarations, but in steady, human truth, that justice begins when we stop accepting silence as the price of survival. Jonathan knew the road ahead would still be long, but now it had direction. It had witness, and it had purpose. Stories like Jonathan's remind us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks calmly, firmly, and with unshakable clarity. If this story moved you, made you think, or made you feel seen, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to our channel to hear more real, powerful stories that shine a light on truth, dignity, and the people who refuse to stay quiet. Because these moments, they matter, and so do you.